For thousands of years, rich people who have had nothing better to do with their lives have started thinking. This, of course, has been a mistake, but we've classified this thinking as philosophy. Today, I've gathered 5 items, each corresponding to the most important parts of philosophy, and I've gathered them together in the box. The first item is a rock. Yeah, a rock. Not only are rocks good for throwing through especially breakable windows, they're also extremely relevant to the subject of metaphysics. Metaphysics in philosophy covers a lot of different aspects of life, one of these being the meaning of life. But how does this rock relate to it? Well, let's break it down. Philosophers have argued for years about what we should be doing with our time here on Earth. Should we be chasing after success? Trying to procreate? Or does life mean nothing and we shouldn't be doing anything for the rest of our lives because the world's going to blow up in 100 billion years? And sometimes, even if you feel like you know what your true purpose or meaning of life is, our lives can often feel monotonous and boring. And sometimes it feels like we're in an endless cycle, doing the same thing day in and day out for pretty much no reason. Many have likened this struggle to the Greek myth of Sisyphus. For the sake of time, I'm not going to delve too much into it, but the main idea is of a king named Sisyphus being punished by the gods and given the task of pushing a boulder up a hill, but every time he gets close to the top, it falls back down. The story is more of a cautionary tale about the dangers of hubris, but philosopher Albert Camus has taken Sisyphus' struggle and turned it into something to aspire for. His famous quote, "One must imagine Sisyphus happy," comes from his essay titled The Myth of Sisyphus, which states that we as humans must imagine Sisyphus happy, because even though his situation is dire and monotonous, he has to accept it and learn to find his own happiness in the monotonous act itself. In this, Sisyphus has turned his eternal punishment into his eternal happiness, and finds joy in his rock.
That's just a stupid boulder!
It's not just a boulder! It's a rock!
I think this view of life is great. It says that no matter what life throws at you, you have to make it into something that brings you joy. This view almost sounds like hedonism, but I think it's closer to existentialism. Camus isn't saying there's any specific joy in our lives we need to search for, it's more of an acceptance of reality having no meaning and learning to enjoy it regardless. Life may suck, but we gotta deal with it and make the best of it. At least, that's how I see it. Though I am more of an existentialist myself, so it's possible I'm subconsciously misrepresenting it to fit my views. What is ethical? This is a picture of Nicholas J. Robinson's house, who of course lives at 46 Boardfish Road. Is it ethical to tell you that the code to his lock is 2634? Absolutely not. This is super unethical. Or is it? See, from certain standpoints, there are probably many ethical viewpoints in which telling you how to break into his house is ethical. Take consequentialism, popularized by Jeremy Bentham, which, in simplified terms, takes the sum total amount of good from an action and uses that to define an action as ethical. So the consequences of an action define what is good. The ends justify the means. What if Nick was the only person who had a house, and his house was more than big enough to support millions of people, but he was stopping everyone from getting in and keeping it all to himself, leaving everyone else out in the cold? Telling people how to get into his house means millions of people get a place to stay, with only one person suffering. Thus, this action is ethical. But something like deontology, created by Immanuel Kant, follows a more rule-based system. There are certain things we can do that are either ethical or unethical, and we should always do what is defined as ethical in a situation, no matter what. Deontology would say that we should never tell anyone how to get into anyone else's house, because that's an unethical action. So we shouldn't say anything and we should let Nick have his house, even if there were millions of people that needed to get in. That's why, for my second item, I'm choosing this image of Nick's house. It represents the complexity of ethics. I mean, should you tell people how to get into his house? Or should you just keep your mouth shut? Consequentialism or deontology? Well, personally, I've always followed using both in tandem to aid you in your search of being an ethical person, rather than following either as hard rules. Because sometimes, either of these side solutions can lead to more harm than good. A staunch deontologist wouldn't sacrifice one person to save a planet because, oops, can't kill people. And a staunch consequentialist might do something that seems to lead to a good outcome, but actually leads to a bad one. And I think most people would agree that using both is the right option. The third item in our box is this. Hold on. It's this, one of the most famous pieces by Van Gogh, Starry Night. Well, actually, it's a tapestry of that piece that I bought a few months ago, but you get the idea. There's 2 simple questions we must answer. Is this art, and is this beautiful? Alright, let's get the easy one out of the way first. This is obviously art. Or is it? No, it is. It definitely is, actually. But there actually is a case to be made that this isn't art. It's called institutional aesthetics. Institutional aesthetics is more of an umbrella term covering a lot of different theories, but it basically states that anything considered art by the art establishment isn't. It's basically the fuck you of aesthetics, and honestly, gotta respect it. Even though, no, that's kinda dumb. This is clearly art. Arthur Danto, an American art critic and philosopher, had a slightly different approach to it. He says that certain things that would have never been considered art 400 years ago would now be considered art because the world around them has changed. So what art is changes based on the environment around it. Which I don't entirely agree with, since that might stop something more classical that was made today from being considered art. But what exactly defines art? Is it the emotion, the intent, or just simply how beautiful it is? I mean, that's what a lot of people think, but what does beautiful mean? Is art still art if it isn't made by a human? What about nature? Can nature be art? Does being a rare or valuable piece matter? Hell, is the fact that this isn't the original piece matter in terms of, is it art? I don't think so. There's a lot of questions in this subject, but in my personal opinion, art is really just whatever you want it to be. Anything is art, from the Mona Lisa to a really nice looking sunset to someone drawing graffiti on a desk. Everything is art, because why not? I mean, what really changes if stuff like this is art? As for what's beautiful, I don't really think that's something you can define. There are obviously certain things that make things look more beautiful, but in the same way that you like certain foods and don't like others, there's just too much going on in terms of personal opinion for you to really define that. For me, art is just something that's fun to look at, because if it's not fun, why bother? Reggie Fils-Aimé. Which is exactly why I ended up buying this tapestry in the first place. Because it's fun to look at. What's fun for me to look at, though, isn't necessarily fun to look at for everyone, so it's important to recognize that everyone has their own personal tastes. Trying to define what is beautiful is, in my opinion, kinda stupid. The next item on our list is this sandwich. It's got a bite taken out of it because I got hungry. How does a sandwich relate to philosophy? Well, what is a sandwich, really? Is this hot dog a sandwich? How about a taco? A cake? How about an ice cream sandwich? I mean, it has sandwich in the name, but it doesn't have bread or meat or anything. For years, the great philosophers have argued over what a sandwich is, and they've used many different tactics to explain their viewpoints. To show these off, let's run a mock argument about a much more serious topic: women's voting rights. Alright, here we've got Gary. Gary has just entered a debate with us, and he thinks that women shouldn't be allowed to vote. This is obviously ridiculous, but let's see what he says. His first argument is, well, throughout most of history, women haven't been allowed to vote, and it was only relatively recently that they could. Are you going to disagree with history? What he's using here is called the appeal to tradition fallacy. Fallacies are arguments that almost sound correct since they at first glance follow logic, but after close inspection actually don't. These fallacies were coined and listed by Aristotle. They obviously existed in some form before him, but he was the first to name and list them. Some of these fallacies are kind of confusing, but this one is pretty self-explanatory. Because we used to do it, we should do it now. This is a stupid argument and it holds no real weight. Calling them out on it and explaining how it's a well-known fallacy should hopefully shut them up. Next, we should state our own point. It's extremely important in any argument to back up your point of view with facts and good reasoning. We should follow a simple structure of points or premises based on facts that lead to our conclusions. There are three types of arguments: deductive, inductive, and abductive. Deductive is strictly true or false based on the premises, good with dealing with straight-up facts. Inductive is probably true based on premises, which is useful when talking statistics. And abductive is a best guess based on the premises. This one is often used when we have limited information and have to make educated guesses. As for our argument, let's make a deductive argument based on our point of view. This is a sound argument because the premises are based on facts. Everything I've listed is true, and these premises directly lead to the conclusion. If everything I've listed is true, then the conclusion is too. But take out even a single line from this argument and now it's technically invalid. So now we understand what a good argument is. It should be based on facts, those facts should directly support the conclusion, and we've avoided any fallacies. It's obviously extremely hard to put these theories into practice, and it's extremely rare to find someone with an argument that's this easy to counter. And that's really the problem with a lot of these ideas. They sound great, but they're really hard to actually use in real situations. So I agree these are great techniques, I just don't think I'll ever actually really use them. But arguing is one of the most important parts of philosophy, and knowing how to structure an argument is the cornerstone of a good philosopher. Alright, here we are, and the final item is you. And also me. And also everyone. I mean, what better object to represent the question of do we exist than us? And we have to think, do we exist? I mean, we can ask someone next to us and they'll say yeah, but how do we know they exist either? How do we know we're not just some brains in a jar being fed information, like the Matrix, and that John from math class is simply another part of that information? Okay, but we exist, right? I mean, maybe the people around us don't, but we have to. We perceive things. And I think most would agree that we exist in some form, but what if we were a simulation? Does being a simulation count as being real? Plato, in his theory of form, suggests that objects aren't exactly real because they're not the perfect versions of themselves. For example, a chair isn't really a chair because although we have an idea of the perfect chair in our minds, other chairs are simply imitations of that perfect idea, not the real thing. So following that logic, are humans not real because we're not the perfect versions of ourselves? What is the perfect version of a human? It's likely that Plato didn't outright believe that humans didn't exist, but I'm just following the logic he outlined in his theory, because either we don't exist or there's some exception for humans in his theory. If so, why? What makes humans different from a chair? Do other animals have the exact same exception? Personally, I never really gave much thought into this. I mean, who cares if I and everything else around me doesn't exist, much less if it's perfect? Cause I've still got school tomorrow, man. It doesn't really change much. I'm not just gonna suddenly stop going because I don't think I exist. I just assume I do exist because at the end of the day, what changes if I don't? And also, how would I even find out? At the end of the day, who cares? Maybe we're real, maybe we're not, but it just doesn't really matter. And those are the 5 philosophical objects that I brought in for you today. I hope you enjoyed the box. If it stopped recording, I'm killing myself.